A certified letter lands on my doormat, an $80,000 invoice from my own parents, itemized for room, board, and love. Before I can breathe, their attorney serves me. Court in 30 days. Tell me where you're listening from and if your family's ever put a price tag on you. Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss how I turned a bill for existing into the day a judge made them hear the truth. My name is Claire Whitman, and I'm 27 years old. I work as a pediatric ICU nurse at Lakeshore Children's Center here in Riverton, Pennsylvania. I'd just switched to night shifts last month. The differential pay helps when you're living in a studio apartment where the radiator clangs like it's auditioning for a heavy metal band. That Tuesday started like any other. I'd gotten home at 7:45 a.m. after a 12-hour shift, showered off the hospital smell, and was about to crash when I heard the mailman's heavy footsteps on the stairs. Something made me check maybe it was the certified letter slip I saw him carrying through my peephole. The envelope had my parents' return address, Martin and Elise Whitman, 14 Maple Ridge Drive, Maple Ridge, PA. My stomach tightened. We hadn't spoken in 8 months, not since I'd refused to co-sign on their home equity loan. Inside was an invoice, an actual, itemized invoice on letterhead they'd apparently had printed Whitman Family Services, payment due for services rendered. The total made me sit down hard on my second-hand couch, $80,000. They'd broken it down by year, starting from my birth. Diapers and formula $3,200, daycare while they worked $14,000, elementary school supplies and fees $2,800. The list went on utilities prorated by the square footage of my childhood bedroom, groceries calculated at 33% of household consumption, even a line item for birthday party expenses totaling $1,800 over 18 years. At the bottom, in my mother's pristine handwriting, investment in child development and life preparation, payment terms, net 30 days. My hands shook as I called them. Dad answered on the second ring. "Did you get our correspondence?" he asked, like we were business associates. "Your correspondence, Dad. This is an invoice. For raising me. Adults honor their debts. Claire, we invested in you. Now you have a stable career." "Parents don't bill their children for existing." Mom's voice came through. They'd put me on speaker. "We sacrificed everything for you, our retirement, our dreams. It's only fair you pay back what you owe now that you're capable." "Capable, I make $42,000 a year before taxes. I work 3 extra shifts a month just to cover rent and student loans." "That's not our concern," Dad said. "You have 30 days to respond with payment or a structured payment plan." "Or what?" "Or we'll have to pursue other avenues." They hung up. 2 days later, while I was sleeping before a shift, my phone buzzed with an email from Baxter and Lowell, attorneys at law. The subject line, "Re-outstanding debt, Whitman matter." "Dear Ms. Whitman, our clients, Martin and Elise Whitman, have retained our services regarding an outstanding debt of $80,000 for costs associated with your upbringing and education. Attached, please find documentation supporting this claim, including a binding agreement signed by you at age 16, acknowledging future repayment obligations. You have 30 days from receipt of this notice to pay the full amount, propose a satisfactory payment arrangement, dispute the claim in writing with supporting documentation. Failure to respond will result in immediate legal action. Regards, Thomas Baxter, Esq." My throat closed up. A binding agreement. I barely remembered signing anything at 16 except permission slips and my driver's permit application. But then, like a slap, it came back Mom standing over me at the kitchen table with a handwritten contract about being responsible for my upbringing costs when I started working. She'd made it seem like a joke, a family exercise in accountability. I was 16. I'd signed it to get her to stop lecturing me about gratitude. I sat in my dark apartment, still in my scrubs from the night before, staring at that email. Outside, normal families were having dinner together. Inside, mine had just sent me a bill for being born. Growing up in Maple Ridge, money was the language my parents spoke fluently. Not love, not encouragement money. They kept a notebook on the refrigerator labeled Claire's Expenses. Every doctor visit, every school field trip, every pair of shoes got logged in that book. Dad would update it weekly, sometimes calling me over to watch him write the numbers, making sure I understood what I cost them. $48 for new sneakers, he'd say, tapping the entry. That's 4 hours of my life. Claire. When I was 12, I wanted to join the school orchestra. Violin rental was $20 a month. Mom calculated it on a napkin in front of me, $240 a year, times 6 years until graduation. $1,440 for noise. She pushed the napkin across the table. Be realistic. But when my cousin Ryan, my aunt's son, needed $1,500 for hockey camp, they wrote the check without blinking. He has potential, Dad explained when I asked why Ryan's interests were investments while mine were expenses. Division scouts are already watching him. Ryan never made it past high school JV. At 16, I got a job at Maple Mart, the local grocery store. Minimum wage, 20 hours a week around school. That first paycheck, $212 after taxes, felt like freedom. Until Mom met me at the door. Family meeting, she announced. They'd drawn up that contract while I was at work. A single page of Mom's neat handwriting stating that I, Claire Whitman, understood the financial burden I'd placed on my family and agreed to repay all child-rearing costs once I achieved stable employment. It's just to teach you responsibility, Mom said, sliding it across the same kitchen table where they'd denied me violin lessons. Everyone should understand what things really cost. But I'm your daughter. Which is why we're teaching you this lesson, Dad added. The world won't give you anything for free. I signed it. What else could I do? I was 16, living under their roof, and they'd made it clear that refusing would make my life even more transactional than it already was. Half my paychecks went to household contribution. Not rent, they were careful never to call it that. Just my share. The other half barely covered gas to get to work and school supplies they'd stopped buying when I got the job. One night during senior year, I was doing homework when I heard Dad on the phone with someone from Pioneer Federal Bank. He mentioned my name and something about survivor benefits. I crept closer to the home office door. Yes, the Claire W. funds, he was saying. We'll need the full amount transferred to checking. Home improvements. Yes, I'm still the custodian on the account. My grandfather, Mom's father, had died when I was 13. I barely remembered him, just that he'd worked for the railroad and always smelled like tobacco and peppermints. There'd never been any mention of money left for me. Later that week, while my parents were at Ryan's hockey game, they never missed his games, I searched the office. In a filing cabinet marked Financial, I found its statements from Pioneer Federal showing monthly deposits of $1,050 labeled Guardian Benefit, Claire W. 5 years of deposits. Over $60,000 that was supposedly for me. The most recent statement showed a large withdrawal, $25,000 transferred to their checking account. The memo line read, Home renovation. I took photos with my old flip phone, hands trembling. The kitchen renovation they'd done last year, the granite countertops. The professional range they'd paid for it with money, meant for my future, while making me work 20 hours a week for household contribution. The next morning, Mom stood at those granite countertops making breakfast. You're up early, she said, not looking at me. Just thinking about college, I said carefully. Community college is very affordable, she replied, the same response she'd given for 2 years. And you can keep your job at Maple Mart. I watched her move around that $25,000 kitchen, making eggs on the 6-burner range bought with my grandfather's money, and realized something that would take me years to fully understand. Some parents see their children as investments, and some see them as debts to collect. Mine had somehow convinced themselves I was both. I showed up at work the next night looking like I hadn't slept in days because I hadn't. Kira Morales, my closest friend and fellow nurse, took one look at me and pulled me into the break room. Okay, spill, she said, pushing a cup of coffee into my hands. You look like someone died. My parents are suing me for $80,000. She laughed, then saw my face. Wait, you're serious? I showed her the invoice and the lawyer's email on my phone. She read them twice, her expression shifting from disbelief to anger. This is insane. Parents can't just... They can't do this, right? I don't know. They have this contract I signed when I was 16. You were a minor, Claire. You need a lawyer. Now. She grabbed her phone. My cousin used Riverton Legal Aid when her landlord tried to evict her illegally. They work on sliding scale fees. 3 days later, I sat in a cramped office across from Amira Lowell, a young attorney with sharp eyes and a coffee stain on her blazer. She'd reviewed everything I'd sent: the invoice, the email from Baxter and Lowell, even the photos I'd taken of those bank statements years ago. First, she said, leaning back in her chair, breathe. Your parents have no legal standing to demand reimbursement for basic parenting costs. Food, shelter, clothing, that's their legal obligation until you turned 18. But the contract, a contract signed by a 16-year-old for something that's already a legal parental obligation. She actually smiled. That's unconscionable and void on its face. No court will enforce it. So I can just ignore this, not quite. They've hired an attorney, which means they're serious about pursuing this. We need to respond, but more importantly, we need to go on the offensive. She pulled out a legal pad. Tell me about these survivor benefits you photographed. I explained about my grandfather, the monthly deposits, the $25,000 withdrawal for their kitchen. Amira's pen stopped moving. Your grandfather left you survivor benefits that your parents used for home renovation. Is that illegal? It's misuse of funds designated for a minor's benefit. Those benefits were meant for your education, your welfare, not granite countertops. She started writing rapidly. What else did they receive on your behalf? I don't know. How would I find out? We'll start with Pioneer Federal. You're entitled to those records now that you're an adult. We'll also request records from the IRS child tax credits, education credits, anything they claimed. And Claire. She looked up. Did you ever receive any scholarships or grants that required parental participation to claim? My stomach dropped. There was something senior year. The Whitford Promise, a $5,000 community scholarship. I won it. But Mom said she'd handle the paperwork since I was still 17. Did you ever see that money? She said it went directly to the community college. But you never attended community college. I got a partial scholarship to nursing school instead. Mom said the Whitford money was non-transferable and got forfeited. Amira made another note. We'll check on that too. Scholarship committees keep records. She gave me a list of documents to request: bank statements, school records, tax returns if I could get them. Your parents turned this into a financial transaction, she said. So we're going to treat it like one. We're going to follow every penny that was supposed to be yours. At Pioneer Federal, the branch manager pulled 5 years of records for the account my grandfather had set up. Total deposits $82,400. Total amount transferred to my parents' accounts $82,400. This was supposed to be held in trust for you until age 18, the manager said quietly, sliding the papers across the desk. These withdrawals. They're all marked as educational expenses, but the transfers went to your parents' joint checking. At Maple Ridge High, the guidance counselor, Mr. Hallie, remembered me. Of course I remember the Whitford Promise winner who never claimed it, he said, pulling out old files. Your mother said you'd decided on a gap year. We had to return the funds to the committee. Such a waste, you wrote a beautiful essay about becoming a pediatric nurse. She never submitted the acceptance. He showed me the email trail. My mother had declined the scholarship 3 days after it was awarded, saying I'd reconsidered my educational path. By the time I left his office, I had copies of everything, including the original scholarship notification addressed to me that I'd never seen. Amira reviewed everything that afternoon. Claire, she said, your parents didn't just fail to support you, they actively stole from you. We're not just defending against their ridiculous claim, we're filing a countersuit. The law offices of Baxter and Lowell occupied the top floor of a glass building in downtown Riverton. Everything about it screamed intimidation: marble floors, leather chairs, a receptionist who looked at my scrubs like I'd tracked in something contagious. My parents were already in the conference room when Amira and I arrived. They'd dressed like they were attending church. Dad in his only suit, Mom in the navy dress she wore to weddings. They didn't look at me. Thomas Baxter was exactly what you'd expect: silver-haired, expensive watch, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Let's see if we can resolve this without wasting the court's time," he began, sliding a folder across the table. "My clients are willing to accept a payment plan. $3,000 monthly for 36 months. Includes interest and legal fees." "That's more than the original amount," Amira noted, not touching the folder. "Cost of collection," Baxter replied smoothly. "Had Ms. Whitman simply acknowledged her debt." "There is no debt," Amira interrupted. "Parents have a legal obligation to provide for their children. They cannot retroactively charge for fulfilling that obligation." Mom's voice cut in, sharp as winter. We went beyond basic obligation. Dance lessons, summer camps, birthday parties. "Which dance lessons?" I asked, breaking my silence. "The ones you canceled after 2 weeks because they were frivolous. The summer camps that were actually me staying with Grandma while you and Dad went to the Poconos." "Don't be dramatic, Claire," Dad said. "Dramatic." I pulled out my phone. "Like creating an itemized invoice for raising your own daughter, like charging me for birthday parties I never asked for, that were mostly your friends anyway." Baxter raised a hand. "Let's focus on the contract. Ms. Whitman signed an agreement at 16. While living under duress in her parents' home," Amira countered. "A minor cannot enter into such a contract, especially one that attempts to monetize a parent's existing legal duties." She was mature enough to understand what that her parents would make her life miserable if she didn't sign. Amira opened her own folder. "Let's discuss what Ms. Whitman's parents did understand, like the $82,000 in survivor benefits they received in her name." Mom's face went pale. Dad shifted in his seat. "That money was for household expenses," Dad said quickly. "Claire benefited from a $25,000 kitchen renovation." Amira slid the bank statements across the table. "These withdrawals coincide remarkably with your home improvement projects, vacation deposits, and a certain boat purchase. That's our private financial, not when it's money designated for your minor daughter's benefit." Amira's voice was steel. "The Uniform Transfers to Minors Act is quite clear about fiduciary duty." Baxter was studying the documents, his expression shifting. He'd clearly never seen these before. "And then there's the Whitford Promise Scholarship," Amira continued, producing Mr. Halley's documentation. $5,000 your daughter earned through her own merit, which you declined without her knowledge or consent." "She wasn't 18 yet," Mom said weakly. "We had to make decisions. Decisions that benefited you, not her." Amira turned to Baxter. "Your clients have attempted to bill their daughter for childhood expenses while simultaneously stealing over $87,000 designated for her support and education. We're prepared to file a countersuit for breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, and fraud." The room went silent. Baxter whispered something to my parents. Dad's face turned red. Mom gripped her purse like a weapon. "We need to discuss this privately," Baxter said finally. In the hallway, Amira touched my shoulder. "You okay?" "They look so ordinary," I said. "Like normal parents. Not like people who would steal from their own kid." "That's the thing about financial abuse," she replied. "It often comes wrapped in normal packaging." 20 minutes later, Baxter called us back. "My clients maintain their position. The contract is valid. The money was used for legitimate household expenses that benefited Claire." "Then we'll see you in court," Amira said simply. As we gathered our things, Dad finally looked at me. "You're really going to do this, air our family business in public? You hired a lawyer first," I reminded him. "We gave you life," Mom said, her voice breaking. "We gave you everything." "No," I said, standing to leave. "You gave me a bill." In the elevator, Amira was already on her phone with the court clerk. "We need an expedited hearing date," she said. "Judge Evelyn Carr, if possible. She has no patience for parental financial abuse." The court date was set 30 days. "They think this is about money," Amira said as we reached the parking garage. But it's about to become about accountability. Amira filed our countersuit the next morning. She didn't just request dismissal of my parents' claim, she demanded full restitution of misused funds, damages for educational opportunities lost, and a forensic accounting of every penny they'd received in my name. "We're going nuclear," I asked, reading through the filing. "They opened this door," she replied. "We're walking through it with documentation." The next 3 weeks became a scavenger hunt through my past. Every day after my shifts, I'd dig deeper. The Riverton Library had old yearbooks showing me in ripped sneakers at school events while my parents posted Facebook photos from their Vegas trip that same year. Mrs. Delaney, our former neighbor, wrote a notarized statement about how she'd often fed me dinner because my parents were too busy to leave grocery money when they went out. The girl would show up with food stamps. Mrs. Delaney had written, saying her mother told her to use them for bread and peanut butter while they were at Ryan's tournament in Atlantic City. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mr. Hallie called me one evening while I was at work. "Claire, I've been thinking about your situation," he said. I pulled some old files. "Did you know there were 3 other scholarships you qualified for senior year? What? The Jenkins Memorial, the Riverton Rotary, and the Future Nurses Fund, together worth about $12,000. Your mother called and withdrew your applications, saying you'd decided against college. I had to sit down in the supply closet. She withdrew them. I have the emails. She said you were taking time to reassess your goals. Claire, I remember fighting her on it. You had a 3.8 GPA and stellar recommendations. I couldn't understand why." He sent everything to Amira that night. The forensic accountant Amira hired found even more. Tax returns showing my parents claimed education credits for expenses they never paid, medical reimbursements from insurance for my childhood treatments that went into their accounts, even a settlement from a car accident when I was 14, $8,000 for my pain and suffering that I'd never known existed. Total documented funds received in Claire's name or for her benefit, the accountant reported, $115,200. And how much was actually spent on me, based on receipts and bank records, approximately $18,000 over 5 years, including basic necessities they were legally required to provide. That night at work, I was monitoring a 7-year-old recovering from surgery. His parents hadn't left his bedside in 48 hours. They'd remortgaged their house to pay for his treatment. The contrast made my chest ache. "Love doesn't keep receipts," the father said to his son when the boy worried about being expensive. "We'd sell everything twice over for you." I excused myself and cried in the bathroom. Amira's response brief to the court was a masterpiece of controlled fury wrapped in legal precedent. She cited case after case of parents being held accountable for misusing children's funds. She included every piece of evidence: bank statements, scholarship emails, tax returns, neighbor testimonies. "The plaintiffs seek compensation for providing basic parental care," she wrote, while simultaneously diverting over $100,000 meant for their daughter's welfare and future. "This is not a case of parents seeking reimbursement. It's a case of parents seeking to profit from their child twice over." My parents' lawyer tried to hit back, filing a motion claiming the countersuit was retaliatory. Judge Carr denied it in 2 sentences. "Defendants have every right to present evidence of financial misconduct. Proceed to trial." The local paper picked up the story. Parents sue daughter for cost of raising her. Daughter countersues for stolen benefits. My phone exploded with messages from high school classmates I hadn't heard from in years. Most were supportive. Some said they'd suspected something was wrong back then. "You always had the worst supplies," one messaged, "but your mom drove a new Lexus senior year." 3 days before trial, Baxter called Amira with a settlement offer. "They'll drop the suit if Claire drops the countersuit," he said over speakerphone. "Clean slate, everyone walks away." "No," I said before Amira could respond. "Claire, consider. They stole my grandfather's money. They killed my chances at scholarships. They made me work to pay rent at 16 while taking benefits meant for me. And then they had the audacity to bill me for existing." My voice was steady. "No settlement. I want a judge to tell them exactly what kind of parents they are. Amira smiled. You heard my client? This could get ugly, Baxter warned. It already is, I replied. See you in court. That night, I pulled out the photo of my grandfather I'd kept hidden in my wallet. He'd died thinking he was providing for my education, my future. Instead, his money had paid for kitchen granite and a boat my parents sold 2 years later. I'm getting it back, Grandpa, I whispered to the photo. All of it. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. No dramatic gallery, no intimidating columns, just worn wooden benches and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill. I sat next to Amira at the defendant's table, my hands folded to hide their shaking. My parents entered with Baxter, avoiding my eyes as they took the plaintiff's table. Mom had worn the same navy dress from our settlement meeting. Dad kept adjusting his tie like it was choking him. Judge Evelyn Carr entered at 9:30 sharp. She was younger than I'd pictured, maybe 50, with silver streaking through her black hair and eyes that missed nothing. We're here for Whitman versus Whitman, she began, already looking tired. I've reviewed the briefs. Mr. Baxter, your clients are seeking $80,000 in child-rearing expenses? Let's hear it. Baxter stood, smooth as silk. Your Honor, my clients made extraordinary sacrifices to raise their daughter. They've documented every expense, going above and beyond basic obligations. They have a signed agreement from Ms. Whitman acknowledging she would repay these costs. He presented the invoice with theatrical precision, walking through each line item. Swimming lessons, dental care beyond routine cleaning, a graduation dress, driving lessons. Driving lessons. Judge Carr interrupted. You're billing for teaching your child to drive. Private instructor fees, Your Honor, $300. The judge made a note. Continue. Baxter produced the contract I'd signed at 16. Ms. Whitman acknowledged her obligation here. In writing, at what age? The judge asked. 16, Your Honor, but she was mature enough. Next argument, counselor. Baxter's rhythm faltered slightly. He pivoted to character witnesses their pastor, who testified via statement about their devotion to Claire's upbringing, and their accountant, who'd prepared the invoice. Then Amira stood. Your Honor, may I ask Mr. Whitman a question? Proceed. My father took the stand, his jaw set like he was preparing for battle. Mr. Whitman, you claim you spent $80,000 raising Claire beyond basic obligations. That's correct. Did you receive survivor benefits from Claire's grandfather's insurance policy? His face reddened. Those were for household expenses. How much in total? I don't recall exactly. Amira handed the judge a folder. $82,400 over 5 years. Your Honor, bank records show every penny was transferred to the plaintiff's personal accounts. That money was used for Claire's benefit. Which expenses specifically? Food, clothing, shelter. Items you were legally required to provide regardless. Baxter objected. Judge Carr overruled. Amira continued. What about the $25,000 withdrawn in March 2018? Home improvements. Claire lived in that home. For how long after the renovation? Dad paused. She left for college that August. 5 months. So you spent $25,000 on a kitchen Claire used for 5 months. She visited during breaks. How many times? Silence. Mr. Whitman? Twice. He admitted. Amira moved on to the scholarships. Were you aware Claire had won the Whitford Promise Scholarship? Yes. Did you submit the acceptance paperwork? We decided community college was a better option. Who decided? My wife and I. Without consulting Claire. She was a minor. Amira produced Mr. Halley's emails. Your Honor, the plaintiffs declined $12,000 in scholarships without their daughter's knowledge while simultaneously claiming financial hardship due to raising her. Mom took the stand next. Under Amira's questioning, her composure cracked. You made Claire work at 16 to learn responsibility and took half her paychecks for household contribution while receiving over 1,000 monthly in benefits for her. Those were separate. Mrs. Whitman, did you ever tell Claire about her grandfather's insurance policy? It wasn't relevant. $82,000 for her education wasn't relevant to her. Mom's voice turned sharp. We made decisions we thought best. Best for whom? Then it was my turn. I'd testified in practice with Amira, but facing that courtroom, seeing my parents' faces half angry, half something I couldn't identify, my prepared words vanished. Tell us about the contract, Amira prompted gently. I found my voice. I was 16. Mom presented it after I'd worked a 10-hour shift at Maple Mart. She said it was about learning accountability, that successful people understand costs. She stood over me until I signed it. Did you understand you were agreeing to pay $80,000? I thought it was one of her teaching exercises, like when she made me calculate the cost of my showers in cents per minute. I never imagined. I looked at my parents. I never imagined they were serious. Tell the court about your college applications. I applied to 6 schools, got into 4 with partial scholarships. Mom said we couldn't afford the remainder, that I should start at community college. I found out today they'd received enough money from Grandpa to cover any school I wanted. How does that make you feel? I thought about lying, about staying composed, but the truth mattered here. Like I was an expense they were trying to minimize while profiting from my existence. Like my dreams were worth less than their kitchen renovation. Baxter's cross-examination was brutal but brief. You lived in their home for 18 years. Yes. Ate their food. Yes. Used their electricity. Yes. And you believe you owe them nothing. I met his eyes. I believe children don't owe their parents for being children. Judge Carr called a recess. In the hallway, I couldn't stop shaking. Amira bought me a terrible coffee from the vending machine. You did great, she said. They hate me, I whispered. No, she corrected. They hate being exposed. When we returned from recess, Judge Carr had a stack of documents spread across her bench. Her expression had shifted from tired to something sharper, more focused. I've requested additional documentation from the court clerk, she announced. Mr. Baxter, Ms. Lowell, approach. They huddled at the bench for several minutes. When Amira returned, she was fighting to keep her expression neutral. The judge ordered a forensic accounting review during recess, she whispered. The court's financial examiner just delivered their preliminary report. Judge Carr cleared her throat. I'll now hear from the court-appointed examiner. A thin man in glasses took the stand. Your Honor, we've analyzed the financial records submitted by both parties. Our findings are significant. He pulled up a spreadsheet on the courtroom monitor. Total funds received by Martin and Elise Whitman designated for Claire Whitman's benefit $115,200. This includes survivor benefits, tax credits claimed for her education, medical insurance reimbursements, and a personal injury settlement. My parents shifted in their seats. Documented expenses actually spent on Claire Whitman beyond basic legal obligations approximately $4,300 over 18 years. $4,000. Judge Carr's eyebrows rose. Out of $115,000. Correct, Your Honor. The remaining funds were used for home improvements, vehicle purchases, vacations, and 1 boat. A boat. The judge turned to my parents. You bought a boat with your daughter's survivor benefits. Dad's face went purple. Those funds were commingled with household. Mr. Whitman, you're not recognized to speak. The examiner continued. We also found that the plaintiffs withdrew Claire's college savings account originally funded by her grandfather 1 week after she left for nursing school. $27,800. I felt the air leave my lungs. $27,000. That could have eliminated my student loans. Furthermore, the examiner added, the plaintiffs claimed education tax credits totaling $8,000 for expenses they never paid, as Claire received scholarships and worked to cover her costs. Amira stood. Your Honor, in light of this report, we move to amend our countersuit to include tax fraud charges to be referred to the appropriate authorities. Noted, Judge Carr said. Mr. Baxter, would your clients like to respond? Baxter whispered urgently with my parents. Mom was shaking her head violently. Dad's hands were clenched into fists. Your Honor, Baxter finally said, we maintain that these funds were used for legitimate household expenses that benefited Claire. Benefited how? Judge Carr asked. Did she get to keep the boat? Nervous laughter rippled through the courtroom. Order, the judge said mildly. Then her tone sharpened. I'm going to ask Mrs. Whitman a question. Ma'am, please take the stand. Mom walked up like she was approaching a guillotine. Mrs. Whitman, you're a mother. Tell me when you held your daughter for the first time. Did you calculate what she would owe you? Of course not. When did you start keeping the expense ledger? When she was about 7. We wanted to teach financial awareness. 7 years old. And you showed her this ledger. Yes. How did she react? Mom paused. She cried. She cried. And you continued. It was important she understand. What that love came with a price tag. Judge Carr's voice could have frozen water. That her existence was a debt to be paid. We sacrificed everything. Mom burst out. Our dreams, our retirement. You chose to have a child. That was your decision, not hers. She didn't ask to be born. But we gave her life, which creates your obligation to her, not the reverse. The judge turned to the examiner. In your professional opinion, did the plaintiffs breach their fiduciary duty? Extensively, Your Honor. They systematically diverted funds meant for their daughter's welfare and education while simultaneously denying her opportunities and charging her for basic necessities. Judge Carr looked at my father. Mr. Whitman, you mentioned sacrifice. Let me tell you about sacrifice. It's a single parent working 3 jobs to keep the lights on. It's parents going hungry so their kids can eat. It's spending your last dollar on your child's medicine. It's not stealing your child's inheritance and then billing them for the privilege of being raised. Dad stood up. She owes us respect. Sit down, Mr. Whitman, or I'll hold you in contempt. He sat. The judge continued. I've reviewed the contract signed by a 16-year-old child under duress. I've seen the invoice that itemizes love like a utility bill. I've examined evidence of systematic financial exploitation spanning years. She looked directly at my parents. In 30 years on the bench, I've rarely seen parents who so fundamentally misunderstood their role. She turned to me. Ms. Whitman, your parents don't just owe you money. They owe you an apology for monetizing your childhood and treating you as an investment rather than a daughter. Then, to my parents, but since you've reduced this relationship to dollars and cents, let's speak your language. The courtroom fell completely silent. Judge Evelyn Carr looked down at my parents with an expression I'd never seen in a judge before, not just disappointment, but genuine disgust. Here is my ruling, she began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. First, regarding the plaintiff's claim for $80,000 in child-rearing expenses, this claim is dismissed with prejudice. Parents have a legal and moral obligation to provide for their children. This is not a loan. It is not an investment seeking returns. It is the fundamental responsibility you accept when you bring a life into this world. Mom grabbed Dad's arm. He shook her off. Second, the contract signed by Claire Whitman at age 16 is void. A minor cannot enter into such an agreement, particularly under duress, and especially not for something that is already a parent's legal obligation. This document has no more legal weight than if you'd asked her to sign away her right to breathe. Judge Carr shuffled her papers. Now, regarding the countersuit, based on the forensic accounting report and evidence presented, this court finds that Martin and Elise Whitman systematically misappropriated funds designated for their daughter's benefit. She began reading from her notes. The court orders the following: Martin and Elise Whitman will pay Claire Whitman $27,800, representing the college fund they withdrew after she began supporting herself. This amount will include interest at the statutory rate from the date of withdrawal. My hands trembled. Amira squeezed my shoulder. Additionally, they will reimburse the $5,000 Whitford Promise Scholarship they declined without authorization, paid directly to the scholarship fund to restore Claire's good standing with that organization. Further, The systematic misuse of guardian benefits constitutes breach of fiduciary duty. The court orders punitive damages of $15,000. Mom let out a sound like she'd been punched. This court also refers this matter to the Department of Social Services for investigation of benefit fraud and to the Internal Revenue Service regarding fraudulent tax credit claims. Your Honor, Baxter started to stand. I'm not finished. Counselor. Judge Carr's voice could have cut glass. All plaintiff attorney fees are to be paid by the plaintiffs. The defendant's legal fees will also be covered by the plaintiffs, as this case represents frivolous litigation and bad faith prosecution. She looked directly at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Whitman, you had 18 years to show your daughter what love looks like. Instead, you showed her what greed looks like. You itemized her birthdays, monetized her existence, and then had the audacity to present her with a bill for the privilege of being born. Dad stood up, his face burgundy with rage. This is our daughter. We have rights. You had a daughter. Judge Carr interrupted. What you have now is a creditor. By your own choice, you turned your relationship into a transaction, so the court has honored your wish. This is what you asked for, a purely financial resolution to what should have been a bond of unconditional love. She raised her gavel. This court orders full payment within 90 days. Failure to comply will result in wage garnishment, asset seizure, and potential criminal charges for the benefit fraud. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. Court is adjourned. My parents sat frozen. Mom's carefully applied makeup had run in streams down her cheeks. Dad stared at the table like he couldn't understand what had just happened. Baxter was already packing his briefcase, distancing himself from the disaster. I'll send you my final invoice, he muttered to them, then left without another word. Amira helped me gather our documents. My hands were shaking too badly to manage the papers. You did it, she whispered. Claire, you won. But looking at my parents, these people who had raised me, who had taught me to tie my shoes and ride a bike, who had also taught me that love was conditional and came with a price tag, I didn't feel like I'd won anything. Mom finally looked at me. Claire, don't, I said quietly. You got what you wanted. A business transaction. The judge did the math. We're your parents, Dad said, his voice broken. No, I replied, standing to leave. According to you, you were my creditors, and now that debt is reversed. I walked out of that courtroom, past the worn benches and fluorescent lights, into a gray September afternoon. Behind me, I heard Mom sobbing, Dad shouting something at Amira about appeals. But I didn't look back. 3 months later, the check arrived sent not by them, but by their bank, after the court ordered the garnishment of their accounts. The memo line read, Court-ordered payment, case 2024 CV 8847. I deposited it and used part of it to pay off my student loans. The rest went into a savings account I named Grandpa's Dream for the day I might have children of my own, children who will never, ever see an invoice for being loved. My parents tried calling a few times after the court order was satisfied. I didn't answer. Love shouldn't come with a receipt, and forgiveness isn't owed to those who put a price on being born. They wanted to itemize our relationship. Fine. The final tally was in, and it turned out they were the ones who owed me everything. Balance paid in full. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm curious, where are you listening from today? Drop a comment and let me know if your family has ever made you feel like you owed them for raising you. Please subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories like this, and share your thoughts below. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is just holding people accountable for their choices.